Hello there. I have here the monolith of Phobos, gifted to me by Buzz Aldrin himself. Actually, it's just a board of Ipe, a very heavy board of Ipe. It's over an inch thick, and, well, it's just big, and it's big enough to make a couple of canes out of. And I've been making self-defense canes, single-piece self-defense canes. I've not yet elevated to the level of sophisticated two-piece canes. I may do that, maybe just out of curiosity. There's a lot more that can be done with that. The limit of the single piece, as I've mentioned, is in if you're parallel to the grain, it's weaker. The grain is running this way. The further you get out from that center, it has certain weaknesses. I don't think that's as much of an issue with some other woods. Ipe, it's one of my least favorite woods. It's got good aesthetics. It's hard as hell, but it's treacherous. The splinters are said to fester immediately. I haven't had any festering, and I've had more than a few, but they do get nasty fast. They're as soon as they get in the hand or wherever they go, it's different from any other splinter I've ever had, and they are abundant in splinters. Any piece I've ever had, you have to be careful. If you look at it, you get a splinter. But also, it's vulnerable to cracking in ways that other hardwoods are not. And everyone seems to worship math, and understandably so. It's wonderful what can be done with it, but it's frequently misleading. And an example of that is the Jenka hardness of of Ipe. It's around 3,600, and that's hard. That's hard. But then you have Kumaru, which is slightly less. Maybe 35 or 3,400, and people assume, well, it's not as hard as Ipe, so it's not going to be as strong. I can say in just about every regard, Kumaru is a superior wood functionally. It's not as pretty as Ipe can be, but it's stronger. It doesn't split as easily. It's just a brittle, really reliable wood, but it does have still a bit of vulnerability in the parallel grain split. Ipe is worse. So, if you're going to make a cane out of a solid piece of wood, presumably a board is what you'll have, unless you find one growing somewhere, and you won't find too much Ipe growing in the US. It's a South American hardwood. Anyway, you're going to need tools. You can try it with a Swiss Army knife. It might take you a lifetime or two. But to get your first cut, and what I do is I'll go through this, I might skip some things. You draw the outline of the cane that you want on your board, and then you cut it. I cut mine with a bandsaw. If you don't have a bandsaw, you could use a circular or skill saw, possibly a jigsaw, I don't know. But you're going to have to cut it if you want the wood. Now, depending on how spiritual you are, there's always the New Age approach. I've seen these YouTube videos where if you play the video and listen to the music for just 3 minutes, all sorts of abundance and miracles will appear. But then there's just the universe. If you will the universe, you can manifest anything you want. I'll try it right now. Oh, great, beautiful, merciful universe. I am afraid of bandsaws, and I don't want to make the cut myself. Please provide me with a pre-cut template. I can feel the energy right now. Wow, that really works. And I can tell you, if I was wearing yoga pants, it would have come to me finished. This is just a rough cut. But anyway, whether you do that through New Age spiritualism or you do the work yourself, you're going to have to cut it. This is just a rough template. Hard, right angle edges everywhere with a little bit of curve. But this is going to turn into something nice, and we'll go through that process. But not until a brief commercial from our sponsor.
Are you or someone you know suffering from or struggling with stupidity? Are you a moron? Is he or that special she? Don't despair. Compelling new research from some guy at the University of Harvard has shown that not all morons are intractable. Some can even learn to hold a book. In a recent paper titled Periodic Administration of Therapeutic Force Boosts IQ in Really Stupid Subjects, using a specially designed proprietary smart stick, the otherwise insurmountably hard head of the moron can be communicated with, in some cases allowing it to learn new things or cease certain behaviors.
This product has not been approved by the FDA and is not intended to diagnose, cure, or treat any disease. Talk to your inner voice before using on others. Not intended for children, the intelligent, or nursing mothers. May cause bleeding, agony, or worsening conditions and death. Call now.
One other thing that makes ePay treacherous is the silica content. It's probably one of the highest on the list. And if you're not aware of that, a lot of these exotic hardwoods have a high silica content. And there are two things worth noting there. One is that it has a tendency to really ruin tools. And not really the tool, but blades, drill bits, whatever you use on it, it's going to wear it down fast. With the bandsaw, you shouldn't expect to get too many cuts before needing to replace it. With a circular saw, I wouldn't use a really good one. I try to get by with an old one if you can. That being said, the most important aspect of that, which very much applies to ePay, is the dust. That dust is basically asbestos. Some people argue that it is absolutely just as bad as asbestos. So you'll need a mask. Minimum N95. I do 99% of my work outdoors, but if you're going to be anywhere near this dust, I would try not to do it in your workshop or in your garage. Try to do it outside, at least where you're making the bulk of the dust. And if you have a respirator, that's advisable. Again, I hardly ever touch this stuff, but I have that big chunk, and I want to do something with it and see how it comes out. So minimum N95 mask. Now, I'm just going to mention this real quick. This will come back. This is a Kutzall brand rasp. It's carbide tip. That does help it last longer. It's awesome. I am a huge fan of the Kutzall products. Every one of them. This is not Kutzall. This is an angle grinder. It's a battery-powered angle grinder. And you can get these discs. You can get the Kutzall brand, which are awesome, but I honestly wouldn't want to use one on this ePay. This is an El Cheapo here, and I don't know what the material is, but it's damn sure not carbide. And I'm going to use that to break down these edges. So all these sharp edges, in the end, this is going to be pretty much round. It's going to look or appear to be fresh off the lathe. I do not have a lathe. Otherwise, I would save a lot of time and use it. I think I've mentioned too that another possibility is to use a round over bit in a router and at least get a big head start by knocking those edges off. It might be a bit tricky in here, but it would give you a big head start. Also, what I have been using is a die grinder, and that I do have a Kutzall bit for. It's a big ball. I think it's 7/8 of an inch, and it has carbide tips, and I use that to just burn through the edges and to start rounding it off. It takes a long time, and that's a variable speed, pretty powerful die grinder with a hell of a gnarly burr on it. So I'm going to try an angle grinder this time and see what happens. Now, it would be ideal if this was clamped down somewhere, and I think most intelligent people would have a workbench or something and they'd have this viced. I don't really want to lug out that setup here, so I'm going to, for the sake of the video and such, make do with this. I might find out rather quickly that it's not a good idea. Already suspecting that. Alright, so it's starting to round out, and I have to say it's not as precise as a die grinder, but it is way faster. So I think in the future, when I'm able to use that method, I will. But I think I've mentioned in the past, one of the reasons I'm a pretty low production guy here is that it's one of those neighborhoods where I'm not really supposed to make a lot of noise, and I don't want to be a pest. So the angle grinder and belt sander, those are tools I rarely use. So much of the work I do is done the hard way and the, I'd say, more quiet way. But one of the things that will happen as I go along, once I get approximately where I want to be, and I do leave more material than I need, I will begin refining this with the rasp. So it's all of my canes have been hand finished with a rasp. Now, it's up to whoever if they want some kind of grip pattern. I've been experimenting with various grip patterns. If you saw the last video on the white oak cane, I gave that a very strange pattern. It almost had a bamboo stalk kind of look to it. That was kind of neat looking, but I think I'm going to go with something a bit different but similar. And I'm going to keep this simple. And what I think I'll do, I have a focus check here, is I'm going to keep each segment about the width of the rasp. And I'm not going to tape anything, I'm not going to draw anything, I'm just going to improvise here. And I'll start by doing this. I'm going to come right about here and I'll make a notch. Once I get that notch, I'm going to kind of write it around. Well, let's see once again where I'm at here. If you saw my camera setup, you'd want to beat me with one of my own canes. I want to beat myself with one of my own canes sometimes. So, find that notch. Man, this is stupid. And I'll rotate the cane and basically carve a circle notch around it. Now, some might be thinking, oh, this is already starting to look as if there's a lot of work involved. And I think, unless you have the ideal equipment, it's probably not something most people are going to want to do. But if you're into canes, then you've got to make it somehow. And yes, this is actually not the time-consuming part. But once I have that, once I have this kind of circle around here, then what I'll do is I will go at an angle. I don't know if that angle is 30 degrees or 25 degrees or what. It's by feel, and it's not really that important. What you'll want is consistency. But I'll lay the file flat, and I'll come in at an angle, and now I'll begin filing all the way around while rotating the cane. Then I will flip it over and do the same thing. Now, of course, I'm not going to drag everyone through every single second or minute of that, but I'll go ahead and make a couple of notches and then come back. Alright, so if you can see here what I have, it's the rough start of the grip pattern. And I'm balancing another cane and trying to fiddle with this at the same time. Oh, this focus is awful. So that is the rough start. Now it kind of starts resembling beads. And you can do that all the way up the cane, just if a hand area's worth, or you cannot do it at all. I find that, especially with a dense wood that's heavy, anything extra you can do to retain a grip on it is going to be helpful. This is the Kumaru one, and this is got some visitors here having too much fun. So I've started this one. This is Kumaru, and this is a small fraction the mass and weight of the Ipe version. Now, what I've done with this that makes this cane unique is it's once again one of those really small boards. So I didn't have any space to get a hook or a really substantial grip. And because again of the vulnerability of the parallel grain split, I have directed the weight of the user over top of the shaft. It looks uncomfortable, it's really not that bad. But additionally, I have given it edges, so this is not a round cane. It's quite thin this way, but then if you look here, it's quite a bit wider. And that tapers in to not really a blade, it's nothing obnoxious. But it definitely focuses the contact point into a very small area with a lot of mass behind it. And as you can imagine, or so I hope you can imagine, the effect of that it's very substantial. So this, if you struck something that way on the side, this is Kumaru. You could probably do that many times before there was any fracturing. Striking something this way, it would take a hell of a lot, assuming this is a good piece of Kumaru, which you never really know. I always think it's good to have a sacrificial piece to test with, to see if the piece you're working with is good, and still you're not guaranteed anything. But I think this, which is look at the difference there. Let me make sure this is in focus. I honestly think this Kumaru cane might break the Ipe cane, and maybe we'll test that. So, this is rough, it's not even close to finished. I don't know which one I'll get to first. But it's fairly low profile, and that is a very substantial self-defense stick. Even if you had to grip it this way, which as I've mentioned, I tend to, if I'm going to use it for striking something, I'll grab it from the floor end. I'm going to have to cut here because I've got some chainsaw work going on in the background. A few more notches on this handle. Ideally, I think it goes about 1/3 the way, and that does it for me. The rest would be aesthetics. It's time consuming enough that I don't want to do anything unnecessary. Hey, anyone want to see my shillelagh? This is one of the remnants of the white oak board that I made the previous cane out of. I've never made a shillelagh style cane before, but I think I'm going to try that here. And this was, of course, just straight edge cuts. And I've taken that angle grinder with that burr wheel on it, and I've gotten a pretty good head start on getting off the hard edges. And for me, without the lathe, it'll just be gradually hand turning it and a mixture of probably the die grinder, and then I'll move to a hand rasp to get it a bit more fine. And in the end, I think you'll see that even done by hand, there are no significant visual lumps or curvatures. It comes out fairly well. It's just time consuming. One has to really want to make a walking twig to go through all of that. Oh, yeah. Also, with the edge of this handle, that too has a chiseled edge. It's probably not very visible, but it's chiseled. And because, again, of the grain issue, it's not an ideal surface to strike with. Any portion of this here is ideal, but if you're not doing it constantly, that could get you through a really hard situation. And being at the very end and having the extra mass, you could chop wood with this. I don't know for how long, but you could chop wood with it, and I have actually. Alright, so from here we'll move on to the other phases, which is really just knocking off the edges. I guess grinding this down and getting the sharp edges off and getting the form, the shape that one wants. I think this is going to have it's going to be a bulbous handle, which again is necessary. But I think I'm going to give it a slight axe characteristic there. So it'll have also a chiseled edge. And I think I'm going to keep this nub. Now, as I've said, Ipe has a lot of negative qualities which make it my least favorite wood to work with. But the end results, you do get something out of it. It can be quite nice. I still don't think it's ideal for a self-defense anything, really. Now, I have found pieces of Ipe that you could not destroy. They were just ridiculously tough. They're often smaller pieces, but more often than not, they're treacherous, and they break when you don't expect them to, and a part of them is indestructible, but the other part is very frail. And then there's the dust. But in this case, this is already dull. It's not cutting nearly as fast as it was. And I've gone through this piece and another piece, and I've got a head start on this. And any head start is helpful with this shit because it takes a long time. But I'll continue to work on this and get to shape, and we'll see how it comes out. I think I'm going to skip ahead of all the other phases or steps and all of that, but that's it. It's a stick. There's really not much to it. just comes down to one's personal preferences and their own sense of style. And otherwise, it is about as simple as you can get. A few helpful hints, of course, might be worth something to you. The notches, I think, are very, very helpful. And those will probably end up on most of my canes. There's probably something else. I think ideally it would be less work, and it would also be structurally superior to have just smaller grooves and maybe not even use a rasp or a much smaller rasp. And they don't need to be that drastic. These are pretty drastic. That's a hell of a notch there. It could just be very subtle, the thickness of a nickel, and just have a bunch of them, and that's enough to really, really add a substantial grip, a lot of extra traction. All right, we'll see how this thing comes out. Behold, the finished Ipe cane. Pardon me while I test it for a moment. There we go. Anyway, that's Brazilian pepper. It's an invasive species. And as I said, the head of this is, well, it's kind of axe themed. It's not an axe, and no, you're not going to chop wood with it really, but it does have a kind of chiseled face to it, so it will, if delivered correctly, it will I think that should do it. It's a friendly tree. It will focus the energy into a concentrated edge, which could be exciting. The back is just round, and here we have the I keep forgetting what guys call these, rumble, gibbly dooble, whatever, but to me it's a texture, and it really, really does make a big difference. It's a hell of a grip, and as I recommend for my canes, I do 1/3 approximately. I want a good portion. That's almost half. 1/3 to a half of the length to be textured. Now here toward the handle, there's one. Originally I did that, I guess, out of some kind of symmetrical compulsion, or I don't know. But it turns out it works well as a, I guess if you were to use the cane to swing it around, holding it from the grip side or grip end, that slight contour, it just allows it to roll around in the hand more easily. It really does improve the feel. Let's get some different views on this. This big appendage sticking out of the front, right here. It's part of the tripod fixture, and it's annoying. I might actually cut the fucking thing off. Angle grinders are pretty useful for all sorts of things. Alright. Never trust the autofocus. And Ipe does have a nice grain when it's sanded fine and finished. It's a pretty wood. This here I call the octung nub, or whatever you want to call it. So you can get some perspective. It's a good sized nub, and for thrusting and poking into things, it could get something's attention. And it looks perhaps a bit almost comical. That is because it's a single board, a single piece of wood cane. And I continue to emphasize that parallel grain, force going downward with the grain, it can split the grain. There are some woods which are much less vulnerable to that, but Ipe is not one of them. Despite its very high rating on the Jenka scale, it has some vulnerabilities. It's not my favorite wood. It's pretty. It really is hard, and that is self-evident when you feel it. But it's not the toughest wood. I have here the finished version of the Kummeru cane that you saw. And this is, I call it a sword cane. It's certainly not a sword cane. This is where I stopped the rumble bilibbly gibblies, or whatever you call them. And here it is very thin. There it is quite wide, much wider than any normal cane. And the edges are beveled, chiseled. So you have it's certainly not a sword cane, and it's not even intended to resemble a sword. But the principle is what I'm trying to convey. And that is, when striking something, there's a large mass of wood behind a thin edge. And that makes a huge, huge difference. I think that you can see the difference in the width. This is a monster compared to the Kummeru cane. But I honestly think this Kummeru cane, if it is a good piece of Kummeru, and even if this is a good piece of Ipe, the Kummeru cane would be stronger. And it's several hundred points, if that's how you view things, lower on the Jenka scale. And this also has a chiseled kind of bladed edge to the handle. And it is comfortable. It directs the weight of the hand directly over the shaft, which is, if you can pull that off, it's helpful with a single piece cane. If this was a two-piece cane, you would simply take another piece and rotate it 90, so that way you would be applying pressure to that handle in the strongest direction. Whereas with a single board, again, your grain is kind of going this way, and if it extends out here, you're peeling it apart. So we'll see what happens in the future with two-piece canes. This is probably my favorite yet. It's not the prettiest. It's definitely not an artisan cane. But sometimes Kummeru really can be a pretty wood. And I think this is a fair example of it. It's a nice light brown, very smooth, just as smooth as the Ipe. It's light and therefore capable of speed. And speed is really important in a defensive scenario, especially if you have multiple objects that are giving you trouble. Speed can be really helpful. If you're a really big creature and you can wield this, I'm pretty sure the blows would be devastating if you have time to land them. This, any normal person could swing this pretty quickly, and I think whatever's on the receiving end, it will be affected. Oh, there were some things I wanted to mention, and of course now that I'm recording, I forget. Under stress, if you've ever been in a combat or situation or a fight, if you really honestly recall that, relive that, you'll remember that you weren't thinking as you normally do. Adrenaline can make you stupid, and in fact so stupid that even a smart stick can't cure that. It can really reduce your IQ and make you do strange things. In these canes, this is rounded, so pretty much any area is good for striking. I'd say the same technically could apply with this, but ideally you have two sides to strike with to get optimal results. And in a defensive situation, limiting yourself, even by any amount, it's a formidable factor. That can be mostly overcome with practice. And I don't think that necessarily requires sparring. I can tolerate that, but the really intimate stuff on my neck, no. So, I always forget the guy's name. The cane dude. He's probably the most prominent YouTube cane guy there is. He makes a very good recommendation, and that when you practice with the cane, you're not doing some kind of wild kung fu stuff that draws a lot of attention. But when you're handling the cane, you're just mindful of how you move, and you can move slowly in a way that doesn't even attract attention. I think that's a cool idea. It's not always applicable, because when you're in your own private space, you can do whatever you want. The point is, if you have a cane that you're going to carry and rely on for such purposes, it's a really good idea to become familiar with the cane and how you interact with it. And it doesn't need to be anything elaborate. But when you extend it, do you know your reach? A really good test to come to a quick reckoning of where one stands with eye-hand coordination is the double end bag that's used by boxers. Flop one of those around for the first time and you'll quickly see, no matter how smart or skilled you are, if you've not practiced on one, you'll see very quickly how deceptive your imagination is with hitting moving targets. It just doesn't work. It takes practice. So the same could apply with a cane or any other weapon, firearm. It takes practice. It's not 100% necessary. Merely having this is better than not. Unless, of course, it's taken and used against you, and that can make the situation even worse. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but still, some kind of practice, knowing your length, knowing how far you can extend it and exactly what that reach is. Just, if you have a cane that's optimized for only two directions for optimized striking, then learn to handle it in that direction. There's not, well, there are a whole lot of other things that can be covered. This was not intended to be some kind of guru video on how to master a cane, but I'm making them for a short time. It's a phase, and I do find it interesting. There's an Amazon van coming this way. It's going to make some noise. It's moving very fast too. Gee whiz. But, you know, if you need one of these to get about daily, you're going to be handling it a lot. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to play with it, to see what it can do. And again, these are what I have on the bottom. They're two totally different sizes. This one came with the steel inserts. I actually pried that out and discarded it. I think it's silly, especially with the hardwood. You already have a hard, flat surface. Why they add steel? It makes no sense. If you add 2 or 3 or 4 surfaces, it doesn't make any difference. You have a hard surface, and that's it. In the old versions of these, which would last a very long time, they didn't have any kind of metal insert. Pardon me for a moment while this big thing is remarkably quiet for such a big bulbous vehicle. current versions of these were tough. The rubber lasted longer. The new ones are generally made in China, and they have metal inserts. I don't understand that. If you have a good piece of wood that goes into it, what does the metal do? It's between the rubber and the wood. Big deal. But there's probably some genius out there that can make sense out of that. I can't. But I don't, if you purchase these, I don't think that's necessary. And if you can only find that style, I would pluck the thing out. Having metal against wood is certainly more abrasive than having rubber against wood. It really serves no advantage. All I can perceive is a disadvantage. But these are two different sizes. I had a smaller one that I put on this because it's a much smaller cane. This was a pretty big one. I don't remember the size, but measure your cane and order the size. Once again, if it's too big, or if the shoe is too big, you can wrap the cane in leather, duct tape, an old sock, whatever you want to. Improvise. So that's it. The two self-defense canes, Ipe and Kumaro. Kumaro is one of my number one recommendations. There aren't many woods in the world that are going to be much better. Of course, there are some woods that I think have... Ouch. We have these biting flies here that surface about this time, and they linger around until the summer rains really get on us and everything's wet. But between now and that time, they are vicious. They'll leave silver dollar-sized welts. And of course, we had a resurgence of the screwworm, which is transmitted by maybe the same fly or a similar fly. But they sting when they bite, and they're super aggressive. They'll stalk you. You can walk a quarter of a mile and they'll follow you. Nasty fuckers. All right.